USDA operates full-time to punish and destroy the small farmer in this country and to promote the mercantile interest. We came across an email exchange between the executive officers of Monsanto Corporation with the head of the pesticide division. He was really secretly working for Monsanto, and they were telling him in these emails, you have to kill this study. It was a study that would have examined the links between exposure to Roundup, the biggest herbicide in the world, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Americans can see the corruption, and we all have this feeling that the system has been rigged against the American middle class. They're strip mining the wealth from the American people and destroying the health of our children and causing this chronic disease epidemic that is the biggest blight on the American middle class in our country, and that it's being used to benefit this oligarchy, this new corporate kleptocracy.
If you've been following me a while, you know that I've been drinking AG1 all year, no matter where I go or what I do. If I'm at the racetrack, if I'm in Europe for 6 weeks, no matter what, I'm drinking AG1 every single morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, what I noticed was that my gut health improved. I could eat so many different foods without it bothering me. My skin has gotten better. My hair is healthier. So many functions that everybody wants to get better. Got better. It's so awesome. And I've been bragging about it so much that my friends and my family have also started taking it and they love it as well. AG1 is the supplement that I trust to support my body's daily needs. And that's why we have been partners for so long. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, plus 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/prettyintense. That's drinkag1.com/prettyintense. Check it out.
Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing? Did you guys get kept up late with cars driving 225 or 30 miles an hour down on the front strip at 4 a.m.? I was still awake for that. Who stayed up that late? No, good, because you want to be ready for today. Well, thank you so much for coming. It is my true honor to sit here with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thank you so much. Should I call you Bobby?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome, Bobby. You know, when I pay attention to the words spoken in politics, when I listen to him, I just manage to keep on listening. And that when you speak, it really feels like you're speaking from the heart, from experience, from seeing it, from living it, and really believing it. And I just think that that's something rare in politics. And I don't know if you all feel the same, but I believe that deserves a hand. I think the first and most obvious question is this transition that you've made recently from the Democratic ticket to becoming an independent. Why'd you do that?
First of all, thanks for having me, Danica. Thanks for your courage, not only your physical courage and breaking all these barriers, but also the moral courage that you've shown over the past several years by going against the orthodoxies. I did not want to leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has been my home since I was born. My family has been members of the Democratic Party. It's been an important feature of our lives, a defining feature of our lives, since all of my great-grandparents came over in 1848 and, from the potato famine, from fleeing Ireland because of famine, but also a very oppressive government in Ireland that passed rules starting in 1691 that forbade Catholics from participating from practicing law or being part of a profession, from owning land, from voting, or from holding political office. And when the Irish arrived in this country, and most of them came over around that time, they took to politics like a starving person takes to food. And they immediately found their place in this country in the political system. And my great-grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston. First, let me put it this way: the ghetto, there was an Irish Catholic before him, but he was kind of a puppet mayor, and he was the first real Irish Catholic mayor. His contemporary was Patrick Kennedy, who was my great-grandfather, on the other side, who was a ward captain. He was a saloon owner and a ward captain in Boston. And his son, Joseph Kennedy, married Rose Fitzgerald, who was my great-grandfather, Honey Fitz's daughter. And they had 9 kids, and almost all of them were involved in politics. So my uncle, John Kennedy, became president. The eldest brother was killed in World War II. My uncle, John Kennedy, became the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. And I was in Catholic school at that age, 10 years old, and politics was almost merged with religion because it was, every Catholic in our country was supporting my uncle because it was a civil rights issue for them. My father was Attorney General. He was then senator from New York, and he died after winning the California primary. My uncle Ted Kennedy was one of the oldest serving members of the United States Senate. He was there for over 50 years. And so I grew up in campaigning, working in them, and feeling like the Democratic Party was my home. So it was almost inconceivable to me that I would ever leave the Democratic Party. I saw the Democratic Party straying from many of the values that my family had stood for and that were part of what people called a Roosevelt Democrat or a Kennedy Democrat. And, I felt in the initial parts of the campaign that my job was to bring the Democratic Party back to its natal values. But there were people around me like Dennis Kucinich, who was running the campaign, who was saying from the beginning that the Democratic Party is now controlled by big corporations, by the military-industrial complex, and they would rather have Trump as president again than you as their candidate. And that's what they did to Bernie Sanders. That's what they did to Tulsi Gabbard. That's what they did to James Webb, progressive people who challenge this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that now controls both political parties, what they call the uniparty, that cabal would never allow me to be the Democratic nominee. My polling numbers were very good, particularly at the outset. And I felt that if I was able to go through the primaries, that I could win. My numbers also showed that our polling showed that President Biden probably could not beat President Trump, but that I could beat him. And all of our numbers showed me beating President Trump if I ran as a Democrat by 8 points, beating Governor DeSantis by 11 points. But that's because the Democrats who don't like me, the people who watch CNN, MSNBC, and read the New York Times, and if I was living in that information bubble, I would have a very low opinion of myself. But the people who are kind of trapped in that bubble, who are very, very hostile to me, and see me, accept this kind of orthodoxy that I was an anti-vaxxer and that I was a conspiracy theorist and kind of a crazy person, that if I was pit against President Trump, that they would still vote for me because their loathing for President Trump is so ferocious. And so I would get them, but I would also get large numbers of Republicans. And I beat everybody in the independents. So the best strategy for me was to win the Democratic nomination and then basically sail into the White House. But the party rearranged a lot of the rules to make it virtually impossible for me to win. So I'll just give you one example. Somebody made a list of 60 rule changes that they made to keep me from getting the nomination. But one of those, they made a rule that anybody, any candidate who steps into the state of New Hampshire would not be able to get any delegates from New Hampshire. So every vote that I won in New Hampshire would go to President Biden. And they were moving toward adopting the same rule for Iowa and the same rule for Georgia. The rule that they proposed for Georgia is that if you stepped into New Hampshire, you couldn't get any delegate from Georgia. They also had a number of other things. They fixed the what they called the pleos, which are these automatic, these super delegates who the party controls, and they would be able to block me from my nomination. So it became clear at some point during the campaign that I would not be able to run as a Democrat and win. And my intention was to win. And that kind of forced me. Everybody else had already, in the campaign, had already moved on. And I was the last person to, finally realize that I needed to switch parties.
Well, there's a will, there's a way. So you spoke about how corporations take over and control these parties, but then there's also rules being put in place state-wise that are changing things. So is it still the corporations running everything? And how does that happen? And how do you get away from them having the control over these parties and not being able to basically see what they're really all about? How do we get away from this corporate power?
The problem is not even the control of the parties, it's the control of the regulatory agencies, the phenomena that's called corporate capture, where the regulated industry becomes, basically gets ownership and control of the agencies that are supposed to protect the public from bad behavior by those corporations. The regulatory agencies become sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate. And I've watched this phenomena throughout my career. I've sued most of the agencies. I've brought many, many suits against the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture was created to protect small family farmers in our country and to protect the integrity and the wholesomeness of our food supply. But in reality, today in the USDA, it does just the opposite. It represents and promotes the interests of big factory farms, of industrial agriculture, of big companies like Monsanto and Cargill, Smithfield Foods, which is the biggest pork producer in our country, which is now wholly owned by the Chinese, Tyson's, Purdue, and the big petroleum fertilizer companies, in other words, the oil companies. And they really, USDA operates full-time to punish and destroy the small farmer in this country and to promote the mercantile interests of these big industrial agricultural interests. I've spent a lot of time suing EPA. I've probably brought more lawsuits against EPA than any other attorney. EPA, and I've sued the regulated industries as well. So when I sued Monsanto, we came across discovery documents that showed that it was an email exchange between the executive officers of Monsanto Corporation with the head of the pesticide division of the EPA for over a decade, a very well-known man named Jess Rowland. And it became clear from these emails that although Jess Rowland was being paid his salary by the American taxpayer, he was really secretly working for Monsanto. And they were telling him in these emails, you have to kill this study, you have to falsify this science, you have to publish science by this group of mercenary scientists who were secretly working for industry. We call them biostitutes. In one exchange, they're telling Rowland, you got to kill this study by ATSDR, which is a different agency than EPA. He had no jurisdiction over it. And he sends them a note back saying, I can't kill that study. I have no jurisdiction over that agency. And it was a study that would have examined the links between exposure to Roundup, which is the biggest herbicide in the world, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and a bunch of other diseases. And Monsanto desperately needed to kill that study because it was promoting Roundup as safe. And they said, you got to kill it. We don't care what it takes. And he then writes a letter back, an email back saying, I'm going to do it, but if I succeed in doing it, you've got to give me a gold medal. And the judge in the first two cases would not, the judges, we went into court with about 2,400, mainly home gardeners who had gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup. And in the first case, we won $289 million from the jury. The second case, we won $89 million. The third case, in the first two cases, the judge would not allow us to show that letter, that email exchange to the jury. But in the third case, the judge allowed us to do it. And we asked the jury for $1 billion. And this is, I'll tell you, the way that this kind of litigation works is there's 2 or 3 firms, and in each case, a different attorney does the closing argument and does different parts of the litigation. There was a kid, a 35-year-old kid, who was a genius, who was going to do the closing argument in that last case. The night before you do the closing argument, you have a debate with all the attorneys around the table about what you're going to ask the jury. We've been sitting there watching that jury for 3.5 weeks and trying to judge what they're going to do and how much we can ask them for. Because you don't want to ask too much. You don't want to overreach because the jury may punish you for that and give you less than you asked for. So this kid said, I'm going to ask them for $1 billion. And we all said, no, you can't do that. And that's too much. They're going to punish us if you do that. But he's kind of the captain of the ship. And he made an executive decision at that point. This is what he said, I know this jury is on my side. I've been looking them in the eye for 3.5 weeks, and I know they're on my side. I know I've got them. He asked them for $1 billion, and they came back with $2.2 billion. And that forced Monsanto finally to come to the table. But it was because, Americans don't they can see the corruption. And we all have this feeling that the system has been rigged against the American middle class, that they're systematically using this partnership with the government. They're strip mining the wealth from the American people and destroying the health of our children and causing this chronic disease epidemic that is the biggest blight on the American middle class in our country. People know that. They have, even if they don't know the details of it, they have this feeling that the whole system is rigged against, American citizens, and that it's being used to benefit this oligarchy, this new corporate kleptocracy. And that was why we got that response from the jury. They were San Francisco, people who just saw that there was something wrong. And no matter how inculcated they were into the kind of the orthodoxy at the time, they were angry about it. And so we see that everywhere. I'm right now in litigation. I'm representing 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, from East Palestine, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. And it's clear that the Norfolk Southern spill happened because of corporate capture. The railroad only had one engineer on it. It's got I don't know, like 120 cars, and there's a mechanism that's used in Europe and Australia, all over the world, that tells you if one of the wheels in the car is heating up. So we've known about this. The agency passed a regulation saying you've got to install these. But the industry was able to get a 10-year delay because it would have cost them, a small amount of money. But they didn't want to spend it. So we have produced now photographs, we know that that wheel was on fire for 20 miles. How do we know this? Because of people's doorbell ringers. People have those videos on their front porch, and we can watch this train going by the different houses with its wheel. At first, the wheel is red and it's sparking, and then it bursts into flames, and then it starts to burn the whole car. The car was filled with PVC piping, and it was flammable. So it was like this giant fireball for 20 miles, rolling across the Ohio countryside. And you could see it from the road, but the engineer didn't know it because he didn't have that sensor. The reason he didn't have that sensor was because of corporate capture. And as a result, the train derailed and has, now poisoned everybody in that area. There were a large Mennonite community that spent a lot of money. It takes enormous amounts of money to transition to organic farming because it takes years for the chemicals to get to a point where you can get that organic certification. The Mennonites have been doing that for years. And so they had an advantage on all other organic farmers. And that part of Pennsylvania had produced a huge amount of really high quality food. Well, now guess what? Their farms are now covered with dioxin. The soils, and it is the most toxic substance that we know of in the universe that is not radioactive. A single molecule of dioxin can cause cancer if you ingest it. And we knew these risks. Everybody knew these risks, but the agencies which are supposed to protect us against those risks were were promoting instead the interests of the regulated industry. And so I've, litigated against you look at all of these agencies, the ones I've litigated against, FDA, FCC, I just won a case in the Court of Appeals against FCC for lying to the American public about the safety of cell phone radiation. And now they've got to go back and redo those rules, and they're just stonewalling it. But if you look at I've sued NIH, CDC, EPA, and FCC, FDA, all of them. The agencies the intelligence agencies, like the CIA, the function of the CIA now is to promote new wars to feed the war machine. I had dinner about 2.5 months ago with Mike Pompeo here in Las Vegas. Never met Mike Pompeo before. He was the head of the CIA, and he was also the Secretary of State. He's a highly educated person. He went to Harvard Law School, Harvard undergraduate. He was a war fighter, a combat veteran. His illustrious career. I never liked him because I saw him as part of the war machine. But he said to me during this dinner, he said, the one thing that I didn't do when I was at CIA that I'm going to regret for the rest of my life is I didn't clean up that agency. And he said, I had an opportunity to do that, and I did not do it. And then he turned to me and he said, the entire upper echelon of that agency is made up of people who do not believe in the democratic institutions of the United States of America. Oh, you have an agency that, is supposed to protect our national security, but and my uncle recognized this even back in 1960 when he had to fire the 3 top people of the agency, Alan Dulles, Richard Bissell, and Charles Cabell, for lying to him about the Bay of Pigs that got us into the Bay of Pigs. And he took public blame for it. But he said privately to his aides, he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Because he knew it had been captured by the military-industrial complex. 3 days before he came into office, President Eisenhower made a speech that is probably today, in retrospect, the most important speech that's ever been made in American history. He made it on my birthday. I went to my uncle's inauguration. He made it 3 days before on my birthday, January 17th, 1961. And he warned in that speech, and this is the grand commander during World War II, of our whole effort, and he warned the American people of the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would transform America from the exemplary democracy that we were supposed to be into a military imperium abroad and a surveillance state, a security state, national security state, a garrison state at home. And my uncle spent his 1,000 days in the White House fighting against that cartel and keeping us out of war. He never sent a combat troop abroad to die. He kept us out of Laos. He kept us out of in 61. He kept us out of Berlin in 62. He kept us out of Cuba in 61 and again during the missile crisis in 62. And he kept us out of Vietnam. His aide, all of his aides, including his most trusted advisors like General Max Taylor and Averell Harriman and Dean Acheson and the others, all said, you got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government's going to collapse. And he said, it's not our fight. It's their government. We can help them the way the French did with us during the American Revolution, but we can't fight their war for them. And finally, he sent 16,000 military advisors, mainly Green Berets. He sent fewer troops to Vietnam, and he sent to Oxford, Mississippi, to put one black man, James Meredith, into Ole Miss. And in October 22nd of 1962, he learned that one of those Green Berets had died. And he asked Walt Rostow, his aide, to bring him a casualty list. And Walt Rostow showed him the casualty list that showed 75 Americans had died in Vietnam. And he said, that's too many. I'm bringing them all home. And that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all American military personnel out of Vietnam by 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December of 63, so 6 weeks later. And 30 days after he signed that order, he was murdered. And a week after that, Lyndon Johnson remanded that order, sent 250,000 troops in Vietnam, which everybody had been asking my uncle to do. Nixon then came in and sent 560,000. 56,000 of our troops never came home, including my cousin, George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive. We killed 1 million of them. My father ran against that war in 68 and was killed the night he won the California primary. It was clear that he was going to go to the White House. And Martin Luther King, who had become a peace activist, died 2 months earlier, was shot 2 months earlier. And those traumas, my uncle's death, my father's death, Martin Luther King's death, the Vietnam War itself, 9/11, and COVID, each one of those traumas pushed us a little bit farther down that road into into the world that we own today, which is the world that President Eisenhower warned us about, where our democracy is now hollowed out. It's a kabuki theater of democracy. We go through the motions and we have these institutions, but none of us believe that our voices are audible at all inside the Beltway, and they aren't. And it's because those agencies became captured by that cartel that Eisenhower warned us about. So, and the Fed, of course, has been captured. The Fed was started for a good reason, to put elasticity and liquidity into the markets in order to bail us out of to give to sound financial institutions, to help them get through financial crises and deflation. But it's now been captured by Wall Street, which uses this quantitative easing, flooding our country with easy money, so that everybody then invests in equity, but people buy businesses, et cetera, and withdrawing it. And all of that equity then collapses. People go bankrupt, and Wall Street comes in, the big bankers, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and scoop up all that equity. And all of the wealth is being funneled systematically upward to this new oligarchy. And COVID was the end of that. During the COVID lockdowns, we closed 3.3 million businesses, and without any scientific citation, without any due process, without any environmental impact statement, without any notice and comment rulemaking, no public hearings, just one bureaucrat who just said shut down all the businesses and never gave us a scientific rationale. And during that 500 days of lockdown, we shifted $4 trillion, the biggest shift in wealth in human history, from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. We created a billionaire a day during the pandemic, and we impoverished the American public, and all of it is ultimately traced back to that agency capture, and particularly the Fed, which is now, has nothing to do with the interests of the American people. It's all about printing money to enhance the wealth of the group that control it.
Wow, it's a lot of information, a lot of sad stats there. I've heard that ideally the goal is that we'll own nothing, that we as people will be happy owning nothing. Is this the ultimate goal of all of this, with BlackRock, Vanguard buying all the homes, essentially putting us in a position where we will have to be dependent and we won't be autonomous anymore?
Yeah, I mean, what I always try to do, Danica, is to not look into people's heads and say this is why they're doing it. But what I do report is the statements that people made. So BlackRock is the ultimate, let's say, profiteer of almost all these bad policies. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are the biggest corporations now on earth. BlackRock has $10 trillion under management. The state of California, the GDP is about $3.5 trillion a year. There were $3 trillion a year. So BlackRock is 3 times bigger than California, the economy. It is the third largest economy in the world after China and the United States. Those 3 collectively own 89% of the S&P 500. So they own American business. They're now trying to buy all the land. They're buying the agricultural land, and they're snapping up the housing, particularly single-family homes. BlackRock is not buying single-family homes itself, but it owns Blackstone, which is. And that's the reason that housing prices have now increased from the average price of a house 2 years ago was $215,000. Today it's $400,000, and the interest rates have gone from 3% to 7%. So a kid who goes out and buys a home today is going to pay 10% interest, and nobody can afford it. And you've all heard stories of people who are about to go into escrow on a home, or about to put down money or sign a contract, and at the last minute, somebody comes in with a cash offer 20% greater than the asking price, and they snap that home off the market. And you say, who is this person who has all this cash? And then you find out that it's an LLC with an ambiguous name. And if you follow the breadcrumbs, that leads you to BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And they are, we're on a trajectory now. They already own about 6% of the housing of the single-family homes in this country. On this trajectory, they'll own between 40 and 60% within 6 years. And we're going from an ownership society to a rental society. And my kids cannot. I have 7 kids. I have the eldest one is 39, and he is in a home. But all the younger ones went to the best schools in our country. They have great jobs, and none of them has even a chance in their own mind of ever buying a home. And none of their friends do. And, that's a real problem for our country. And we've let down this generation of kids. And I'll come back to that in a second, but to answer your question, the head of BlackRock is a guy called Larry Fink. And Larry Fink sits on the board of the World Economic Forum, which is, sponsors every year this, what they call the Billionaires Boys Club, this big convocation in Davos, where they all come together, the billionaires of the planet, to arrange what what the world will look like for the rest of humanity. And their tagline for where they're headed is they call it the Great Reset. When Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum, was asked to explain and summarize in a sentence what the Great Reset means, he said, it means that you will own nothing and yet you will be happy. So they're in charge of the first part, which is that we will own nothing. And then we're going to be in charge of the second part, which is figuring out how to be happy. And, people aren't happy with this. There was a very disturbing poll that came out recently. There was a poll in 2013 that asked American young people between 18 and 39 years old, whether they were proud of the United States of America. And 85% of them said yes. The same poll taken a month ago, the same group of people, only 18% said they were proud of our country. So the young people in this country have completely lost their faith and their pride in America. And it's because they have no hope for their own future. And it's our fault because we have let them down. We have betrayed them. And, when I was a kid, the central bedrock promise of the American dream was that if you worked hard, if you play by the rules, that you can finance a home, you can raise a family, you can take a summer vacation, you can put something aside for your retirement, and on one job. And there's nobody in this generation that believes that promise applies to them. No, there's nobody. And we have utterly betrayed this generation of kids, and they're growing up hopeless. And to me, that's what I want to change that as president. When we had, after World War II, there was a 50-year period in this country, and that economists call the Great Prosperity, when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And we owned when I was a boy, my uncle was president, we owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were the biggest exporter of goods. We were the moral authority on the planet. Everybody wanted what we had. They wanted our blue jeans, our transistor radios, our RCA Victrolas. American automobiles were the gold standard car in the world. And a lot of that was because we had destroyed our bombs, and and Hitler's war had destroyed the industrial base of Japan and Europe, and that we still had an industrial base in this country that we had ramped up for the war machine, and now we're beating into plowshares. But the big reason also that happened was we got every American into a home. In 1946 and 1947, we passed the GI Bill and a whole bunch of other legislation that made it really easy for American middle class to buy a home. Because they own a home, if you own a home, you care about your community. You care about, you go to the PTA meetings, you care about your schools, you care about the police, the hospital, the transportation. You care about the appearance of your home, your neighborhood. You care about your neighbors. But more importantly, you have an entree into American capitalism because you have equity, which means you can borrow money, which means you can pursue your entrepreneurial impulse. You can create a business. You can borrow it. You can take a second mortgage, and you can bet it on a restaurant or a yoga studio or retail outlet. And this capacity, this access of an entire generation of Americans to equity, to capital, allowed them to exploit what Franklin Roosevelt called America's industrial genius, the entrepreneurial spirit of our country, and actually act on it. When you turn us into a nation, from a nation of owners to a nation of renters, we go from being citizens to being subjects because people can no longer participate in capitalism. Thomas Jefferson, an American democracy will only survive if we continue to have, if the land is controlled, the land base is controlled by tens of thousands of yeoman individuals and families, each with a stake in our capitalist system and each with a stake in our political system. And today we're losing that. These three companies are now owning everything. And not only, we're now in a situation where the average income in this country is now $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs. So if you are in that cohort, which is more than half of our countrymen, of our citizens, you end up even buying not good food like you get in Whole Foods, but the grocery store food that is loaded with chemicals, where you have to eat 8 carrots today to have the same nutritional value as 1 carrot had 20 years ago. Even living at a basic income, food, transportation, and housing, you end up at $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. How are Americans handling that? They're putting it on their credit card. Oh, and Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, and Morgan are charging them $22% interest. This commercial fisherman sent me a screenshot of his credit card bill about a week ago. It's 37% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking, and they go to jail. But these credit card companies, it's business as usual. And who owns every one of those companies? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. During the pandemic, we closed all these businesses, but we kept one business open, Amazon. And we all got a 3-year lesson in how to use Amazon. Amazon censored one of my books criticizing the lockdown. I'm suing them for it. And so they got to criticize the policy that was closing down all their competitors and minting them hundreds of billions of dollars. And we all learned how to use Amazon. I didn't know how to use Amazon prior to the pandemic. And it's magical, of course. You find a picture of something you want and you put send, and it's in your driveway the next day. So that's very, very seductive. But we pay a price for that convenience, which is the local retailer who is paying taxes in this neighborhood is now gone. 41% of Black-owned businesses will never reopen. And these were the guys who employed your kid during the summer vacation. They're the guys with the plaque on their wall from the local Boy Scout troop of appreciation. They're the guys who paid for my children's hockey jerseys with their Little League uniforms. They're gone. So you spent a little more at that retailer, but that money circulated in our community again and again and again and enriched us all. Today they're gone. And Amazon doesn't pay local taxes. And guess what? They don't pay federal taxes. Last year, they paid 0. And who's the biggest owner of Amazon? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So you see, that they're doing it right in front of us. They're strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American public. They're destroying our capacity for sovereignty, for self-enrichment, for fulfillment, or spiritual and economic fulfillment. And they have too much power. And they also are the biggest contributors to the political party. I'll tell you one other thing. We committed $113 billion to Ukraine in March of last year. And that same month, and by the way, we've then given them another 24 billion since, and now President Biden's asking for another 60 billion for a war that should have never happened. The Russians tried repeatedly to settle it on terms that were extraordinarily beneficial to us in Ukraine. And we made Zelensky tear up those agreements after he signed them, and the Russians were withdrawing. These are things that we don't hear from the mainstream media because they're all owned by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. But that same month, 113 billion we committed. That same month, we cut food stamps to 30 million Americans from $283 a month to $23 a month. Try feeding yourself on $23 a month. We cut 15 million Americans from the Medicare rolls. And the Fed printed $300 billion extra dollars, unanticipated, to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it, and when the war machine needs it, we got the doors wide open. But when Americans are hurting, when they're starving, when they're hungry, when they're sick, there's nothing there for them. And Mitch McConnell was asked that month, in March of 2022, the same, when we gave all this money, committed the first $113 billion tranche. He was asked, Republicans are supposed to be concerned about the deficit. Can we really afford this? And he said, don't worry about it. It's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to American military contractors, to the Northrop Grumman, to Raytheon, the General Dynamics, to Lockheed, and Boeing. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. Oh, and why do we want to, the war is really about whether we can move NATO into Ukraine. Why do we want to move NATO into 15 countries? We promised we would. We already moved it into 14. We promised when Gorbachev dismantled the Soviet Union and allowed us to reunite Germany, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. So why is the drive to do it? Well, part of it is, and when those countries sign up for NATO, they have to conform their military purchases to NATO prescribed armaments, which are all made by those companies. So they're giving those companies a big new market. It's a guaranteed market that's worth billions for them. Oh, Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, when all the Republicans were saying about how they wanted, we're going to give whatever Ukraine wants to win this war. We got to do that. And then the Democrats are saying the same thing, by the way. But they said it during this debate. Then we're going to go to China and we're going to go fix them, and we're going to go to war with Mexico. And one of the MCs said, from Fox, said, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. Aren't Republicans supposed to be concerned about the deficit? And Tim Scott said, well, don't worry, because it's not a gift to Ukraine. It's a loan. Oh, raise your hand if you think that loan is getting paid back, right? It's not. Nobody thinks it is. It's not. Why do they even say it? Well, because when you call it a loan, it gives you the ability to impose loan conditions. What are those conditions? Well, an extreme austerity program for Ukraine that makes sure if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to stay poor forever. But more importantly, Ukraine is forced to put all of its assets up to sale on the international market to multinational corporations. So it's airports, it's ports, it's toll roads, whatever. Most importantly, all of its land, its agricultural land. My son fought in Ukraine, incidentally. He fought with a special forces unit in the Kharkiv offensive as a machine gunner. Oh, I have great compassion for the people of Ukraine, but they're getting rolled. They're a proxy war, and to serve geopolitical ambitions of in a war between the United States and Russia. But Tim Scott said it's a loan. Well, here's a big thing. The agricultural land of Ukraine is the most valuable asset in Europe, arguably. It is the breadbasket of Europe. It's the richest farmland in the world, and there's been 1,000 years of wars fought over it. There's now 450,000 Ukrainian kids who should never have died, but who have died to protect that land, to keep it in Ukraine. But the loan agreement says they got to put it all up for sale. It creates something called a land market, and they've already sold 30% of it. Who bought it? Monsanto, DuPont, and Cargill. Who owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. Oh, and the big costs of that war are going to come after the peace, when we rebuild all of the things that we just destroyed. And we get to tell who gets the contract to do that, and that's already been settled. Who do you think it is? Who got the entire contract? BlackRock. They're doing it right in front of us, and they don't care because they don't care that we know about it. Why? Because the system they have is fixed. They have a mechanism for making sure that we never solve this problem, which is they keep us all at each other's throats. They keep the Republicans and the Democrats hating each other, and blacks and whites and immigrants and national. And when the king and queen look over the balustrades of their castle and they see all their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the banquet hall and they pop champagne corks because they know nobody's coming over the wall for them. And that's how they do it. And what I've pledged to do over the next 12 months and over the 8 years of my administration is to stop all that fighting and go over the wall and take our country back from the people who have stolen it.
Wow. Feel like we're getting an understanding why nobody wants to debate you. Because there's a lot that's being hidden, and some of it's not even being hidden anymore. And your polls are on the rise. Formula One's the fastest growing sport in this world. It's because of this transparency. I don't know how big of fans you guys are of Drive to Survive and various different things like that, but Driver's social media, you're seeing more. You're getting to see what's really happening behind the curtains. And that's exactly what you're doing with your campaign, is you're telling people what's really happening. And it's shocking and it's sad. And we all want to be autonomous human beings with sovereignty where we can grow and expand and own things. So what do you believe is the most important topic? It is so hard to turn the big ship of this country as a president, but that one thing that you're going to do that's going to start turning the ship, what's that's going to be?
Well, I think generally it's about dismantling this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. But each one of those agencies has to be fixed. That's how you do it. You unravel the corporate capture, and because I've litigated against them all, I have a unique knowledge about how to do that. When you litigate against an agency, you get a PhD in corporate capture and how to unravel it. I know the individuals in a lot of these agencies who are the hubs of the corruption. I understand the perverse incentives that are part of the policies that put corporate capture on steroids. And I have a deep understanding of the agencies and how they work and how to fix them. And I think my understanding of it is unique because of my background and just in litigating against them and seeing the corruption firsthand.
I wouldn't call myself political. I get sort of turned off by the drama, the presentation of information versus execution. What would you say to people out there that have been turned off by politics? Why should we be engaged?
Well, I understand why people are turned off because, like I said, it's a kabuki theater, and you're not. I mean, how did we end up in a place where we have 380 million people in this country, and the two people that you're given a choice to vote for, the major political parties, are people that most Americans don't even want to run? One of them who has, and I'm not saying it a bad thing, but I think it's obvious to everybody. It became obvious to me because I wanted to debate President Biden, but I don't think he's capable of doing that. I don't think he's capable right now of having unscripted encounters with voters. And then, President Trump, who has a very, very strong and loyal core that doesn't represent most of the people in this country, has legal problems and a lot of other issues. So when you poll Americans, it's like 83% of them don't want this choice. And so I understand why people are disillusioned with our country, but I think, it's not time to give up. It's time to try to do what we can to take our country back.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.